Afternoon or good evening, depending on where in the world you may have tuned in. Welcome to the latest installment in this Black Hat webinar series, AI to enable AI, step up to the growing data security challenge with an automated approach, brought to you by Black Hat, Cyera, and Informa. Terry Sweeney here with Black Hat. I'll be your moderator today. Just a few quick announcements before we begin. If you've been here before, you know this webinar is designed to be interactive between you and the presenters. We strongly encourage participation and are happy to take your questions and comments. After today's speakers finish, they'll be answering your questions. You know the drill. Just type your questions into that Ask a Question text box on the bottom left of the console. We'll answer as many questions as the time allows. Later in the program, we'll also be asking for your feedback about this event. If you've been here before, you also know the slides advance automatically throughout the event. You can also download a copy of today's presentation from that resources box at the bottom of your console. We also recommend disabling your pop-up blockers. If slides aren't advancing for some reason, please press the F5 key on your keyboard to refresh your console. If you're experiencing any technical problems, please visit our webinar help guide by clicking on the help ? Icon on the bottom right of the console. So let's move on to the presentation, AI to enable AI, step up to the growing data security challenge with an automated approach. Today's presenters are Yotam Segev, co-founder and CEO of Cyera. He's joined by Rick Turner, Senior Principal Analyst of Emerging Technologies for Omdia. Rick, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Terry. So perhaps a few words to begin. First of all, I thought it was an interesting title that we came up with here, AI to enable AI. Well, surely, what does that mean? I mean, AI is AI. What we're talking about here is the fact that so much generative AI and indeed automation are finding their way into the average organization these days that it requires for you to handle all of the data that's going to be generated or flowing through your organization. You need an AI-based automated system to be able to address it, because with manual processes, you ain't going to be able to keep up with all of the data and all of the data management challenges that entails. So in a sense, it really is an AI-based system that's going to enable you to use all that AI. This is kind of shorthand version of it there, AI to enable AI. So, quick little agenda. Wanted to go back through DLP, data leakage prevention, also data loss prevention, as some of you may know, have been around for a while. This is a technology that kind of precedes where we are now. It's been around 15 years, 20 years maybe. And it was very much the technology for data security that popped up really just after the turn of the millennium, when we kind of needed to address the fact that there was so much more data being generated, the fact that it was flowing all over the place, and increasingly the fact that it was going to and from the cloud. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, and also then get to some of the limitations of the DLP world. And then I'm going to talk about data security posture management, DSPM. No coincidence, since that's exactly where Cyera are. That's what they do. And so we'll be talking about them. And that will enable me to hand over rather nicely to the much better informed Yotam Segev, who for the final section of this, where we get to talk about how it works. In other words, okay, DSPM sounds great. What the devil does it do, and how does it do it? Which he can go into gory details about, and we'll have a bit of a conversation about that going through. So let's jump in with some of it about DLP. Right. I pulled this off the internet somewhere. I kind of like it. It's just really basically, what does DLP do? DLP solutions, they've called it data loss prevention. It was always a toss-up. Some people call it data leak prevention. It's the same difference. But anyway, DLP is technology that popped up circa, I don't know, 2003, 4, 5, that kind of time frame. And there were a bunch of startups, as usual with cybersecurity. So much technology comes from the startup community. And then as it is gradually proven and more people start to need it, a few of the big guys start to take notice, and they then rather rapidly snap up some of the smaller characters so that they can incorporate that into their portfolios. That was very much what happened with DLP. The land grab was basically through the middle of the 2000s, 2004 through to about 2007. But probably the last big one, I think, would have been when good old Symantec, remember them? When they were still the biggest security company in the world? And they spent no less than, what was a monstrous amount of 400 million on a DLP company called Vontu. Now, cynics would have you believe that Vontu was also the last remaining standalone DLP company, so it was the only one left for them to buy. But I'm not going to say that, merely to mention that there was an awful lot of M&A activity immediately before that, as the big guys did start recognising the need for DLP. And this is what it did. It sat on the edge of your infrastructure and looked at the incoming stuff, be that stuff coming from an email server, from a web server, or just from the good old internet. Maybe it was just stuff that you were downloading from the internet directly, or from, in other words, all of that traffic incoming needed to be looked at, and more to the point, the stuff going out from you needed to be checked. Okay, are we allowing this stuff to go out? What about, is that an issue if we let this email? Rick's sending an email, but he seems to have some data in there that really should not be going outside of the boundaries of the company. It should really be blocked, or maybe it should be allowed, but only in read-only format, or maybe it should be redacted so that some of the sensitive bits are removed. In other words, it was trying to impose that control on any data that was outbound to any of these systems, email, web, or just onto the good old internet. You know, maybe a webmail client or something. In other words, any data that was outbound needed to be checked before it went out, and it was a valid attempt, a valuable attempt to try to keep control of corporate data as we was doing more and more outbound data flows to try to keep it safe so that we didn't have data loss. That was fine. It was all rules based at the time, because that was pretty much where the state of the art was. So one needed to keep up to date with a good set of rules, and it was quite labor intensive, because obviously everything is dynamic, including your rule set. Therefore, you need to continue to be updating your rule set. Oh, things have changed. Suddenly, that website that I was sending stuff to 2 weeks ago is now compromised. Somebody has just managed to take that website over, and all of a sudden, it's become nefarious. Okay, let me make sure then that no more data goes out there. Let's update that rule. That other website has now become good again. It used to be bad, but now it's good again. Okay, we'll let that data flow, and so on. And so you see that there was a lot of work. It was labor intensive, quite tough. There were folks doing DLP as a service, but even so, they had to then be integrated with your team so that they would be able to keep the rules up to date on your behalf, which obviously is challenging as well, because if they were running 50 different people's, different companies' DLP servers, well, that was 50 different rule sets that they needed to keep up to date. So in any case, it was tough, but that was where we were at. It fairly rapidly evolved from its early days when it was really doing on-prem data, leaving the organization and therefore needed to be checked. It suddenly realized that, okay, that's great, except for the fact that increasing amounts of our corporate data are starting to live on the cloud. Bear in mind that we're talking here in the mid-2000s, and Salesforce was founded in 1999. So it is starting to ramp up by the middle of the decade. It hasn't quite got enough money to build that monstrous, great big tower that it now has in San Francisco, but it's well on the way to it and making its owners very rich. It's the first big star of SaaS, of course. And by the middle of the decade, we've even got, so 2006, we've got AWS launching its first two services, in other words, EC2 and S3. That's a data bucket. So there again, we have more. So that's both on the SaaS side and even incipiently on the IaaS and PaaS side, we start to see more services becoming available, more folks adopting the cloud. SaaS absolutely explodes through the first decade of this century, of this millennium. And after that, it's so IaaS and PaaS have caught up. More and more data is living out on the cloud. DLP did indeed seek to evolve. It had to evolve in order to be able to at least see what is going on in terms of what am I uploading to my Salesforce instance, but then also what am I allowed to download and send somewhere else. Lots of these other these complex scenarios which were not originally thought of when data was just living entirely on my corporate premises. But so it did indeed evolve that. And of course, it was still essentially rules-based, which means, again, more and more complexity, more and more need to update it. And there we go. It says it all, really. You had to punch holes in your network in order to be able to do DLP. Not always a good idea, a security issue in its own right. Then there was all of the things that you can see here. You'll be getting the slides, so I won't need to read it all the ongoing maintenance I've already referred to. But the whole issue of DLP, the fact that you had to schedule scans even. I mean, all of these factors had to be factored in when you were deploying and when you were running a DLP service. Now, Yotam, I want to ask you, I've seen some indication that some of the DLP guys have tried to incorporate elements of AI, but my impression is it's still basically rules-based. Am I right?
I think you are right with your analysis.
Yeah.
It's pretty hard to change the architecture that you've already built. If your classification engine is rule-based and not machine learning and AI-based, it's very hard to transform it. As we all understand, architecture is at the heart of all software. The way you deploy, the way your services are incorporated. And the reason that innovation keeps on challenging the incumbents is because architecture is also a limit. It's very, very difficult to change.
You're right. Yeah. Fair point, sir. Yeah, makes sense. I would also add, by the way, that I'm using the term DLP vendors. That's actually almost a misnomer because so many of the DLP guys disappeared into the belly of larger entities that it's very hard to go out these days and say, this company is a DLP vendor. There are many companies, lots of the big guys who have DLP in their portfolio, and often these days it will be deployed in, say, for instance, a CASB, a cloud access security broker. Increasingly, you're seeing DLP in other systems, in some CNAPs out there, cloud native application protection platforms. So, in other words, it's part of a broader portfolio of products that are deployed all together. And so that makes it hard, first of all, to follow the evolution of DLP, but secondly, also to really get your arms around the size of that market, because most of the people who are selling it no longer split out the revenue that they're making specifically from DLP. So we know it's a decent sized market, but can I tell you that it's worth X 100 million or Y 100 million? Much more difficult because it's now much more diffuse, simply because it has disappeared into the fabric of broader products, usually deployed on a proxy or somewhere. So in any case, it's a misnomer to refer to DLP vendors anymore. There just ain't no more dedicated DLP vendors. And of course, here we're highlighting the manual processes and the pattern matching that you're engaged in it just doesn't have the speed or the scale. So you've always got the risk. I like the iceberg here. I do like that. I suspect that actually even the bottom half should be much larger, because quite frankly, there's so much more data, corporate data, or there's so much more shadow data. What do we mean by shadow data? Well, we're talking there about the ease with which, in a cloud scenario, somebody in test and dev, someone who's doing app development, some guy who's working in the marketing department says, wouldn't it be a good idea if we ran this survey, and maybe this survey will tell us all the people that want to eat, Rice Krispies with soy milk. Well, we got some sample data. Well, let's shove some sample data into that database that we'll spin up in AWS, and then we'll just fire the survey at that and see what we come up with. And they do that, and it's great, except for the fact that they've left it up there. 6 months later, the project has moved on. They've decided whether they're going to launch the soy milk to go with Rice Krispies. They've completely forgotten the database. The number of databases that are sitting out there orphaned that need to be discovered. And of course, DLP doesn't do that. So there's lots of this missing the unknowns, the infamous Donald Rumsfeld unknown unknowns. I mean, there really are so many of these. And not to mention the problems of misclassification. I mean, look, all of these issues that we're raising here, and the fact that it'll take you anywhere between 9 months and 2 years to actually deploy the darn thing. So there's lots of issues with DLP, and it clearly is not. It may be still doing a reasonable job with your on-premise stuff, with some of your SaaS data, but it just is not really fit for purpose for the modern architecture, where not only your data, but also your employees are everywhere. So, I mean, you'd have to channel all of their data, their traffic back through the DLP box or the engine, wherever it sits, for you to be able to see what they're doing. If they're going straight to the internet, forget about it. So all of these challenges there, and as I say, you'll be getting that, lead us to this point where surveys show that this many security leaders just have real issues with getting the business that they work for to use the data properly. That there'll be silos of data that are not being used. There'll be other silos of data that are being overused, hammered like crazy. They need to split them into 3 so that they can load balance. But there's all these other issues around the security of those different data silos and those data repositories around the organization. So yes, there is a challenge there. And this is where we talk about enter DSPM. And I was remembering actually, Yotam, that when you and I first met, which would have been about September of last year, I think, a big AWS event in the States. And it was so recent, this sector, that dear old Gartner, who, as we all know, gets to christen or to baptize every emerging sector, dear old Gartner had not even decided what it was going to call this sector. It was toying with calling it Cloud Data Posture Management, CDPM, and then it plumped instead for DSPM, which I personally am glad about, because it puts DSPM in the same spectrum as other proactive technologies, such as Cloud Security Posture Management, SaaS Security Posture Management. We've got DSPM, and then there are even more recent ones like Application Security Posture Management and Kubernetes Security Posture Management. I personally like the SPM, the fact that they continued with the SPM. I also like it because it kind of means that you don't have to be limited to data that's in the cloud. You can also look back and be concerned about the data that's still on-prem. I don't know if you agree with that.
I do agree with it. I think that DSPM is a great acronym and a great place to start. I think that it doesn't encompass everything that a company like Cyera wants to be for its customers, but it's definitely a great place to start. And I think especially what this acronym or what this terminology encompasses is the unique characteristic of high ROI in a short time frame. And that was exactly the excitement around CSPM. It wasn't that there weren't other ways to deal with vulnerabilities in the cloud. You could try to take your Rapid7 or Tenable and start scanning your cloud environments to some degree. But what CSPMs changed for cloud security, they changed the ROI and the time to value tremendously.
Yeah.
And that's what caused them to become adopted. And that's what caused them to become mainstream. And I think that DSPM will do exactly the same for data security. It's not that you couldn't theoretically take your legacy vendor and start plugging into your cloud environments. You could. But if you want to get a good ROI and you want to get an amazing time to value, you're not going to do that. You're going to move to the cloud native technologies that are going to enable you to really succeed.
Which is really where we're going. Which brings us back to the whole leitmotif of the conversation, which is the need for an AI-based and automated system in the first place, which of course DSPM is, and which DLPs are not. So yes, very much so. I agree entirely with that. Right. Okay. So these are kind of the core capabilities. First of all, you've got to do discovery because you are discovering all of the data stores that exist within the organization. The organization says, okay, we've got a cloud estate that spans AWS, Azure, maybe Snowflake, maybe Salesforce, almost certainly. And, if you have GCP, perhaps, whatever, you need it. Once you are pointed in the direction of all of those different clouds where the organization has activities, then the DSPM needs to go out and discover all of the data stores that are there. And from there, it starts to learn, well, okay, these data stores contain this much data and this type of data, the level of sensitivity of that data, and then we need to apply to that some of the controls so that data is not going to get lost or is not going to be stolen, is not going to be exfiltrated, and so on. We'll see that a bit further as we carry on. There you go. I mean, obviously, cyber resilience is a key capability here. We talk a lot about resilience in the world of cloud, in particular, in as much as cyber resilience is really the ability to withstand the challenges of being in the cloud, operating in the cloud in particular. I mean, cyber resilience predates cloud, but in essence, the challenge that we're facing here is that our attack surface has expanded exponentially thanks to the cloud and thanks to the ease with which new instances can be spun up by any Tom, Dick, and Harry in any line of business without the IT or security teams even knowing about them. So then cyber resilience is one of the key requirements. Compliance never really goes away. It only gets more and more complex. I mean, all right, I'm sitting in Europe where GDPR is everywhere. Even in the UK, after we left the EU, we still have to comply with GDPR for obvious reasons if we want to trade with anybody on the planet. And so compliance is not going away. And if anything, I think probably that it will only continue to get more complex as more requirements come down the pipe. And of course, in the world that we're living in, cost optimization is always a desirable thing, but is perhaps more important at moments of economic stringency when there's just not the money going around. People are wanting to get more more bang for their buck, and the bucks just aren't as plentiful as they might have been at other times. So all of these things are addressed by DSPM. You're getting a lot of those things. I'm not going to read through all of these bullets. You'll get this afterwards. But at this point, I'm going to hand over then to Yotam, and I will now become the the person who occasionally dips in and says something. But Yotam, over to you with an example of a DSPM platform, which just happens to be Cyera. So over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Rick, and thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us. I enjoyed it greatly. I want to talk a bit about this slide because I think that in this slide we show something that is, a glimpse into the future, a glimpse into what can be possible as the DSPM category continues to mature and evolve. And we're talking about companies that are investing a ton in software development, a ton in innovation. And we're talking about a time where technology has really leapfrogged, whether it's cloud or AI. All of these possibilities make it a reality to be able to do so much more than we were able to do in the past. And that's something that we always have to be aware of in technology, right? Technology doesn't advance linearly. It's not every year it gets better in exactly the same amount. Some things really change the foundations of what we're able to do with technology. And we're now, in my mind, we're riding two immense waves in the enterprise space. One of them is the cloud wave, and the other is the data wave, the AI wave. And those waves are changing the capabilities, are changing the possibilities. When you look at this slide, what you see here is the vision of one holistic, comprehensive, operational data security platform at the heart of the enterprise, allowing you to achieve the data discovery and classification across all of your various systems. Those systems can be cloud systems, can be on-premise systems. Those systems can be endpoints. All of those systems hold data. All of those systems are amassing more and more data, and the enterprise is accountable to all of them. What you don't see here in the slide, but is not just as important, if not more important, are the third parties. All of those suppliers, vendors that the big enterprises are working with, sharing data with, and are becoming some of the most vulnerable aspects of the enterprise security posture. You're seeing the possibility to investigate a data security incident across the entire enterprise stack, from the email to the endpoint, to your Office 365, to the network as it's leaving the enterprise imaginary virtual four walls. And you're seeing the hope that companies like Cyera in the DSPM space will be able to simplify data security and to make it accessible for enterprises. The big banks, the big financials have invested tremendous amounts of capital and resources and talent in operationalizing DLP programs. It took them a lot of work, but that is struggling to keep up with the changing IT landscape. And of course, it's not accessible to anybody who isn't a huge financial. So the need to make it accessible, to make it simple, and to make it connected and up to date with the latest technologies and challenges, whether that's Snowflake, whether it's the use of machine learning models in-house. Many organizations, and that's part of the title of this conversation, are looking to become data-driven organizations. They want to use their wealth of data about their market, about their customers, about their business in order to gain a business advantage. And at the heart of that is, how do we build our own machine learning models, our own AI models, and how do we get more out of them? And those are all changes that are happening in every enterprise today. Enterprises that you would imagine as being very traditional are looking to be cutting edge, to leverage AI, not only for employee productivity, but much, much, much bigger than that. How do we conduct our business with our customers? How do we leverage the wealth of information that we have about our market? And all of that is quickly changing the landscape in which we operate. And Cyera and the DSPM platforms that are continuing to innovate and invest in this space are coming to really be able to bridge the gap, to allow organizations to control data that, whether we like it or not, has become a first-class citizen, to control data, to understand data, and to protect data, and allow the enterprise to innovate, move quickly, get the full business value that it can from the data that it has, and do that in a way that is secure, compliant, responsible, like enterprises want to behave. Cool. So going a bit into how it works. Rick, feel free to jump in at any point. Don't be shy. I know you tend to be shy, usually. So we talked a bit earlier about, go ahead.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Yeah, shyness is my middle name.
Yeah, Rick Shy Turner. That's how they call you. We talked about ROI, and I want to get a bit more into that and explain why. Why is the ROI so clear, and why is the time to value so short? So traditional data discovery classification solutions operated over the network. That meant that you had to have an inventory of all the data stores that you'd like to scan. Then you had to connect the solutions at the network level to each and every data store out there. That means penetrating the network. That means provisioning network access. Those are hard to do things in any organization, especially in highly regulated, highly secure organizations that have segmentation. The whole point was to have no network access between different parts of the network. And now, in order to scan, you actually have to go and penetrate that network. You had to provision service accounts and to manage those service accounts over time, to give permissions to each and every data store in order to be able to scan it. The scanning was done on the live database, on the live data store. The DBAs hated it, so they put up a fight. You had to negotiate a scanning window with them, and they would tell you, oh, go ahead and scan at Sunday between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. That's when we don't really mind the performance impact. And that was extremely hard to manage. The classification engine was regex-based, pattern-based. So you had to know what you're looking for, and you had to find the right people, the right talent that were able to translate that, hopefully, into regexes that could potentially find the data. All of this turned into a very, very heavy and cumbersome project. So theoretically, you could discover the data and you could classify it. But when it came to actual implementations in big enterprises, it was very difficult and expensive to roll out. And much of the value was only provided at the end of the rainbow. Only if you managed to go through all of these challenges and survive and get to the end, which took years and years, would you actually see the return. And enterprises like all of us, especially in 2023, we prefer instant gratification. If I can have the results today, then I know I'm going to continue to invest tomorrow. But if you tell me that the results are only going to be there in 3 years, that's a much harder investment for anyone to make. So those were some of the challenges that traditional solutions encountered. DSPM vendors are cloud native. They use API scanning instead of network scanning. So all you have to do is connect the solution at the API level to the cloud provider, to your VMware cluster, your OpenShift cluster, and the solution maps all of the data stores inside of that virtualization layer automatically. And it's able to scan them through the API and not through the network. And that maintains the network segmentation you've already established. It overcomes the need for service accounts to each and every data store. You don't even have to know what data stores you have. And honestly, most people don't. So all of that turns the deployment process from something that is an enterprise endeavor that is either sponsored by the CIO or has no chance to succeed into something that almost anybody can set up once, and that's it. Not only that, but it's auto-maintaining. So if a new application is moved into those environments, if a new data store is spun up, the solution automatically identifies it, picks up on it, and starts classifying the data within it. That's the tremendous change of moving from a network scanner to an API-based scanner. Exactly the same change we saw between the traditional vulnerability scanners and the CSPM solutions. Instead of scanning over the network, you're now scanning over the API. And that shortens the time to value in a way that is unimaginable, and shortens the investment that needs to be made in order to scan everything you have there in a very, very significant way. Of course, the classification engine itself is also crucial. What security practitioners told us time and time again is the data that I know I have out there, that's already half a problem. What I'm really afraid of is the data that I don't know I have out there that maybe somebody's collecting, maybe somebody started amassing in our environment, maybe somebody brought in through an acquisition or through an application that is no longer with us 5 or 10 years ago, and it's still sitting there, exposing us to risk, exposing us to compliance issues. That's what I'm really worried about. How can you help us find that? That is exactly what machine learning and AI are amazing at doing. You don't have to ask the customer what data to look for, and you don't have to let the customer configure regexes in order to find it. You're able to make sense of the enterprise data plane in a very similar way to the way Google Photos make sense of the tens of thousands of photographs and videos we have in our iPhone, right? They don't ask you, what is this, what is that? They show you. They show you that all of these pictures are pictures of one person. They show you that if you want to see pictures of boats, just type in boat and they'll show you all the pictures of boats you have. The same logic, the same technology can be applied to the enterprise data plane and help to make sense of the types of documents that are living out there, the types of data that is living in your databases, unique data types that only exist within your business unit or within your organization, and to be able to do that automatically. Because security teams today are stretched thin to the bone. There are no resources left over. Nobody's looking to take on another project. All of us are looking for ways to do the same, but with less. That's what every CISO is being asked by their leadership. Can you keep us as secure as we are today, but with less resources, less investment? And in order to do that, we have to look to automation and AI. That is where these efficiencies are going to come from. And that is part of the value proposition that DSPMs bring into play, both in the way they deploy, but also in the way they classify. Rick, you've been awfully quiet. I'm starting to get worried.
No, mate. I'm just very impressed. I like the way that you've made that point about the move from. I mean, you made the good analogy from the vulnerability scanners, the traditional vulnerability scanners on the network, all the way to the CSPMs doing it via API. I think it's a perfect analogy.
Thank you. So let's dive in a bit deeper and add some more context into that. Another challenge that is a challenge across all of our security tooling and all of our security controls is context, right? You have a finding, something turns on the red light. The question is, how much information do you get with that finding? How much information do you get with that alert? If there's no context provided, the amount of effort, the investigation that needs to be conducted in order to contextualize and understand the finding is tremendous. And that makes it extremely difficult for security organizations. You know, Jim Ralph once told me that security vendors that find problems are like a cat bringing a dead mice to their owner's doorstep. The cat is all proud and the owner is like, yuck, get it away from here. What am I supposed to do with this? So lighting up the Christmas tree with more and more alerts and more detections doesn't help anyone much, because you need to do something about it. You need to be able to actually consume that, deal with it. And one of the things that machine learning and AI allow us to do, as well as being focused on the security context of the problem, is to contextualize the findings. And it starts with contextualizing the data itself, the data classification. It's no longer a one-dimensional problem. It's not just what is the data. It's also whose data is it? Is it European data? Is it Canadian data? Is it California data? Is it my employees' data? Is it my customers' data? Is it the data that belongs to a specific business unit? All of that and many more aspects are more dimensions about the classification itself. Classification can no longer be one-dimensional. It's just not efficient enough. And machine learning and AI allow us to infer those types of contexts automatically. You can know that not only are we looking at personal information, but this personal information is identifiable, making it subject to GDPR and CCPA. And not only is it identifiable, it belongs to California residents. So in fact, CCPA is in effect. All of that can be given to you out of the box through the use of machine learning and AI. And that shortens the amount of investment that needs to be done in order to remediate these findings, to triage these findings, and to take care of them. Of course, as important as the classification context is the security context. Who can access the data? That's the first question that any security practitioner asks after they encounter a sensitive data sitting somewhere in the environment that they were unaware of. Who has accessed the data in the past? Has anybody accessed it in the last 48 hours? Has anybody accessed it in the last month? All of these questions allow us to tackle security concerns, but also data lifecycle management and compliance concerns. And these can be provided automatically as part of the tooling and do not require any further investigation from the team. And that, again, emphasizes the return on investments, makes it much easier to get to the value, and makes it much more accessible for organizations to adopt and leverage. An interesting aspect, an interesting concern is DDR, data detection and response, or how do we monitor the data in near real time? Data is very similar to water. It moves all the time, it changes all the time. And in today's agile environments and cloud environments, things just happen, right? As many gates and controls that we'd like to put on our CI/CD, data is not controlled in the CI/CD today. And a small change to the application can change the data that we're collecting and the places that it's being collected. A small change of configuration in your cloud provider can expose data in ways that you didn't intend to. And we're seeing that happen to every organization, no matter how serious, how professional, and how locked down. Because we're innovating, we're moving, we're changing. Things are dynamic. The question is, are we able to detect these things in near real time? And are we able to bring them to light in a way that is contextualized and easy to understand and help the organizations take actions before any of these security risks materialize? And the answer is that the cloud creates many new challenges, but it also creates amazing opportunities. The amount of logging systems, the amount of context that those logging systems provide are amazing. And data detection and response really gives us an opportunity to deal with all of these aspects. We got to the questions.
Is that okay? Right, great. I was just going to say before we did that I'm glad you brought up DDR there at the end, because one of the things that I've been asking all of the DSPM vendors that I've been speaking to over the last year is, okay, that's great. You've got this wonderful proactive capability of let me go out and see whatever issues are out there and misconfigurations and excessive access rights and all of those good things. Bring that back in and allow my team to address those issues before there's even an attack. That's great. The proactive aspect is wonderful, but there's always going to be a reactive requirement, which is at some point someone's going to try to attack this data. And so when they do, I need to have some technology that's sitting there and be able to actually say, okay, we're under attack. Let's respond. And I think that that DDR capability within the DSPM platforms is really the order of the day now. And I would say that if a DSPM platform doesn't have a DDR capability, then it's really selling you a bit short. You really do need that. Terry,
I do think, though.
Sorry, go on, mate. Carry on.
I do think that, what we've learned, if we've learned anything from DLP was very focused on the perimeter. How do we detect at the perimeter and how do we block at the perimeter?
Yeah.
But if you don't have a good inventory, if you don't have the basics down, then that oftentimes comes up short-handed as well. So with much respect to DDR, and it's a space that we're invested in and investing in more and more, I think that starting with the inventory, the data classification and discovery, and with the DSPM, the security configuration analysis, it's the return is just much more imminent and much more. You don't have to wait for something to happen in order to get the return. You're getting the return every minute.
I would even turn that on its head and say that, in fact, it's the proactive technologies like DSPM that can reduce the attack surface so that the reactive technologies like DDR have less to do, because there's just less work on their plate simply because there's less attackability, frankly. So I thoroughly agree. DSPM must be the foundational layer upon which you can then build, okay, now we've got all of that proactivity in our data management. Now let us also make sure that in the worst case scenario, if someone's still going to try and mount an attack, let's protect ourselves against it, but with all the knowledge that we've accrued from doing the SPM. So I thoroughly agree with that.
All right, you two. Well, I'm going to ask you to go back to your corners now, even though you seem to be in violent agreement here. But also, thank you both for some great perspectives on securely managing our data, doing it with greater accuracy, and doing it at a scale that's only going to grow. This is all important stuff. So, gentlemen, thank you both. As Rick said, we do have some time for questions. Before we go there, just a few quick reminders. Please use that Ask a Question text box on your console to get your questions in front of our speakers today. You can also download a PDF copy of the presentation in the resources box on your console. Lastly, please fill out that feedback survey that allows us to improve on future events. So let's turn to questions here. Question from our audience: can DSPM implement attribution if it detects intruders in the network? Yotam, do you want to take a first crack at that, and Rick can follow up?
Yeah, gladly. I think that the connection between data and identity is so tight. It's so important. It's at the heart of everything that is bothering security organizations today. And though DSPM vendors are data security vendors, in my opinion, they have to do a lot in identity, and they have to dive into identity for attribution, but also in order to answer questions like data access governance. Who can access the data? Who is accessing the data? All of those questions are questions that combine the data aspect with the identity aspect. And whereas in the past, we saw solutions that didn't take the step and didn't reach out their hand to the neighboring solutions in the ecosystem to find that bond, I think that today the new generation of DSPM vendors is doing that and is reaching into the identity space to be able to answer those questions and to do that attribution in many, many different layers of the stack.
Yeah, I would just add to that Aditya, that the attribution, obviously, since we're talking there about detection, that is, just to be pedantic, that is part of the DDR bit, or in as much as there you're actually talking about a real live attack that's underway, and if you detected it, then yes, you should. They do need to be able to do that, and therefore another one of the reasons why I would say that that if you're looking at DSPM solutions across the board, make sure that you quiz all the potential suppliers as to what's their strength in doing detection and response of attacks on the data. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a much needed requirement.
Great stuff. Another audience question. Do fog servers that are used in closer proximity to main corporate offices, can they be used as an extra layer of security for primary cloud data? The questioner is asking if this might be a stronger deterrent to the threat of a breach. Yotam, do you want to take a first crack at that one too?
I'm not sure that I understood the question completely, and I'm not sure that I have a great answer.
Okay. Rick, is that something that's resonating with you?
Fog servers, it's a term I've only come across once or twice. And it's a good question, Susan. I think the idea is that you're mooting here, that it could be a further level of security. It sounds logical to me. Just my first response there to that, my first thought of that, my first reaction to your question. It does sound like they could be used in that way. I need to go back and have a look further at the way that they are being deployed, whether they are, how can I put it, whether they would be an additional layer of security or potentially a further level of exposure. So if we can take that offline, I will go away and give that a bit more thought and get back to you. But certainly, I would say certainly notionally, there's no reason why they could not be an extra level of security. I just need to know more about the way they're deployed.
Sure. Thanks for that. Let's shift slightly to another question. What constitutes a good DSPM solution? What sort of criteria should listeners use to judge these systems?
I'll go first with that one, if I may. I would definitely say that if you are in, as I've mentioned already, I think in this conversation, if you are out there searching for a DSPM solution to deploy in your infrastructure, in your environment, you definitely want to think, okay, do they only do cloud data, or can they also look on premise? Not all of them can at the moment. Some of them tell me they will do at some point down the road when there's sufficient demand, but they say there's enough work for them in cloud alone. And so, and if you're as many, most I would say enterprises are a hybrid in your environment with your data, then you're going to need the same kind of capabilities for the on-prem stuff as well as for the cloud. So do quiz any potential a supplier as to whether or not they can do both cloud-based and on-prem. That's one. I would say DDR is a second requirement because, as Aditya's question highlighted earlier, you're still going to need to be able to detect when an attack is underway, as you can do attribution as well with the DDR component within a DSPM platform. That is very, very useful. Those are the two that occur to me at the moment. Oh no, and the other thing, sorry, there's one more. Make sure that they can do unstructured data, structured data, and semi-structured data. Not all of them do all of those. So again, check on their capabilities with each. Yotam,
do you have some thoughts about criteria to use to judge DSPM solutions? What do you typically tell customers or potential customers?
Yeah, I think we're seeing some vendors with the network scanning capabilities and not the API scanning capabilities that are claiming to be DSPM solutions. I don't even see them as DSPM solutions. I think it's just not appropriate to make that claim, but they do make that claim, and I think that might be misleading to customers, to enterprises in the type of experience they should expect, right? Like it's almost like calling a horse a car, right? Like you come to buy a car. Now there's some good cars, there's some mediocre cars, but a horse is not a car, right? Like no matter how much it can still get you from place to place, but it's a different experience than what you signed up for.
Sure. Well, that takes us to another question that we have that's somewhat related as we look at hybrids. And the question is, will DLP and DSPM eventually become one product? I mean, the track history of the industry is integration all over the place, platforms that become multi-purpose. What are you guys' thoughts there?
I'll start again, if I may, on that one. Sure. I don't think that they will become one product. I do think you will see DLP and DSPM potentially living within the same bundle, if you like, of products. I can imagine that happening. I think that's already starting here and there. Simply because, I mean, like CASBs, it makes a lot of sense. Potentially, maybe you could put a DSPM capability in a CASB alongside DLP. But given that the roots of DLP are very much, as Yotam was saying, both rules based, regex based, they are not easy bedfellows, if you will, to both sit on a common AI underpinning or a common machine learning engine. Therefore, I don't see them becoming a single product, but definitely I could see them coexisting within some kind of a broader gateway product or proxy type of of deployment. Yotam, you any
Yotam,
thoughts?
do you see this functionality merging?
I think it will. Actually, on this one, I see it a bit differently than Rick. It's not something that will happen in the next 2 years, but I think that gradually DSPM will become full comprehensive data security platforms and will incorporate many of the core capabilities of DLP within them. I think that people will stop deploying endpoint agents specifically for DLP. I think that will be swallowed into the existing endpoint agents, EDRs, if you will. And we'll see a situation in which data security platforms become the core data security system for enterprises, and DLP will be swallowed into that. Other niche use cases and niche peripherals will emerge around it, right? The game will change in that regard. But I think the focus has shifted from DLP in the sense of let's catch something as it's leaving our perimeter to DSPM in the sense of let's understand what we have and make sure that we're keeping it in the way we should. It's also due to the change in the volumes of data and the velocity of data. Like I'm not a very senior person, not a very old man, and I grew up using a floppy disk. A floppy disk. Like that was the way we moved data from place to place. That was the amount of data we could move from place to place.
Uh-huh.
Where is the world today, and where is that world? It's not so long ago, that world. So big data is a terminology that's been around for over a decade now. Yeah. But the meaning of the word big in this sense has changed completely. And in this new world where there's so much data being amassed, where the garage that we're keeping the data in that used to have 4 walls, our on-premise data center, it's now completely extensible in the cloud. You can pile on more and more and more and more, and the cloud providers will be happy to charge you for it. Like in this new world, the amounts of data require much more effort in order to understand, comprehend, to keep track of than in the past. So I think the focus will shift from DLP in the classic sense to DSPM, but those DLP capabilities that were actually valuable will be incorporated into that.
Right. Well, thank you for that. That also brings us to our time. That's the end of today's Q&A. In that vein, I'd like to thank Segev of Cyera and Omdia's Rick Turner for their insights and expertise. I also want to thank our audience for attending today's webinar, brought to you by Black Hat, Cyera, and Informa. I'll be sending you an email with a link to access this presentation on demand. Please feel free to share with colleagues who couldn't be part of today's live presentation. On behalf of our guest experts, Yotam, Segev, and Rick Turner, as well as our sponsor, Cyera, thanks for attending today. This has been Terry Sweeney from Black Hat. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.